Okay, welcome to part 2 of the A8 build of the kit from DJH, and hopefully today we are going to complete page 1 of the instructions, which is the basic chassis. Now before I start, I need to make an introduction to my companion, who you may have noticed in other videos that I've made. He looks like a brown bolster across the bed, but if I move, you will see that this is one of our greyhounds, and this is our boy greyhound, male greyhound. He's 6.5 and his name is Boris, and he's my almost constant companion when I'm modelling. So if you notice a brown bolster in the background, it is him. Okay, so introduction's over, and now we're going to get on with the building. So the first thing that we're going to do, there are a number of half-etched holes on the main chassis members, which are these, is this bit at the top. It's in effect two pieces which are joined by a strengthening piece here and the fixing for the smoke box of the boiler. So what we're going to do is we are going to drill out the half-etch holes and fit 0.5mm brass rivets, which I mentioned in the first part I favour. Okay, so I will do that off camera. You don't want to see me drilling 40 odd holes and soldering those in, and I will come back to it when it's been done. Okay, I've installed the rivets in the chassis, which I have left in the fret. You may or may just about be able to see them. There's an 8 that just above my finger. There's 8. There's 50 in total, and the method that I've used is, as I said, individual 0.5mm rivets from Prime Miniatures. That's one of a number of methods that you can use. The rivet holes are half etched on both sides of the chassis, which is a little bit unusual, but it does make life a lot easier. Other methods, you can use standard rivet press. I have one, but it's quite an old one, and it doesn't work all that well. Or you can use 0.7mm wire, which is what is recommended in the instructions. But as I said, I've used 0.5mm rivets from Prime Miniatures, and there's 50 of them to fit. The next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to remove the chassis from the fret, and I'm also going to skip ahead a little bit because I'm going to assemble the coupling rods. So if you just bear with me, I'll remove this from the fret and then we'll carry on. Okay, we've removed what the chassis is. We've removed it from the fret, and this is what you're left with. The projections at the bottom are for supporting the injector. This one's for supporting the large injector. Not quite sure what this one is for at the moment, but it will probably become self-evident as we go through the construction. And these are the supports for the front footsteps and the reversing gear, which need to be bent down as and when this gets to the stage where it does need to do that. What we're going to do next is we're going to install the front driving and the rear driving wheel bearings. We're going to leave the middle ones blank for the moment, and then we're going to assemble the 4 lots of 4 coupled coupling rods, which are required to make the 6 coupled coupling rods. So that will be the next thing that I'll do. Installing the bearings, it has been necessary to slightly ream out the holes because there's a certain shrinkage, and there's also an etching cusp on the inside of the holes, so you'll need to do that. The tool I used, if I can find it, just a standard tapered reamer, very gently checking all the time that the bearings fit. The same applied for the rear pony wheel, the ovals at the back, and that was necessary to be filed out with a round needle file to make sure that the axle bearings move up and down in the slot. But it's not particularly difficult to do. So I'll go off now and I'll install the bearings, and then I'll come back and show you what I've done. Okay, so I've soldered the 4 bearings in the front and the rear driving axles. These are, it's just conventional solder using low melt 145 degree solder, or whatever you prefer. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to install the middle driving axle bearings, and as I said, I don't know if you can remember from the first introduction that I decided that I was going to make the front axle float to a certain extent. What I've done is I've managed to get some bearings which are from a David Andrews Super D kit, which I made some time ago. These are the cutouts for the horn blocks, which I saved. Now I'm going to use some 1.5mm H section brass, and I've checked that the nickel silver bits for the axles actually slide within the H section brass, as you can probably see. So I'm going to install the middle bearing, put this on top of the bearing, and then fit 2 pieces either side so that this bit slides in the H section brass like a horn block. As I mentioned, the frames aren't really thick enough to fit horn blocks. I felt that it would significantly weaken the chassis, so I'm not going to use ready-made horn blocks. I'm going to make similar, make my own sort of version. I think the middle axle only needs to have a little bit of articulation to cater for irregularities in track, but the kit is designed to be built rigid. It's whatever's up to you. Build it rigid, try and install horn blocks, or just make the middle axle float, but that's entirely up to you really. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to show you the result of this. I won't go through a blow by blow actually doing it, but I'll show you the result afterwards. Okay, so I've done this bit now, and you may be able to see that either side of the middle axle there are 2 pieces of 1.5mm H section, and if I get this correct, these are the pieces off the David Andrews Super D, which I found in my scrap box, and we put it inside, and that's the wrong side. We put it inside, and as you can see, it moves pretty well. It moves pretty well up and down. It's difficult to see because of my big sausages, but it moves up and down, and that will allow the axle a certain amount of float. So the next thing to do is to actually enlarge the hole in the chassis, this hole for the bearing, and for that I'm just going to use a diamond tipped grinding tool. It doesn't. Won't need a huge amount of movement. It only needs to be able to move 0.5 millimetre either way. So you don't have to grind away. And then the other thing is, you don't have to worry too much about the profile of the hole, because the hole in this bit, which slides in the guides that I've installed, that will actually hold correct, but we're not going to solder those in place until I've made the coupling rods to check that the wheel spacing is correct. So at least we'll have a chassis that hopefully will run pretty well when we come to install the wheels. So that will be the next thing that I do. I'll go away and do that and then show you what I've done, and then we'll move on to assembling the coupling rods. Okay, so the next stage, which isn't strictly speaking on this particular page of the instructions, page 1, I've removed the etch coupling rods. There are four coupled etches, as I mentioned before, because of the unusual arrangement of the wheels on this particular locomotive. And you can see I've kept them joined, and what I'm now going to do, I'm going to use two 2.3 millimeter drills, which is roughly the size of the axle hole, as a former, and I'm going to fold them over and solder them together and then clean them up, and I'll show you that when I've done that. Okay, so this is the arrangement for doing the coupling rods. So I've got my two 2.3 millimeter cheapo drills from Amazon, and I've drilled a hole in my my work plank to put one of the drills in, and then the coupling rod fits over each of the drills to keep them roughly aligned. I'll now solder this, and I'll do this 4 times, but this is the method that I use, and it's commonly used by the rest of you, I expect. So I won't actually film me doing this, because you'll all be reasonably familiar with actually doing this. Okay, so I'll make 4 of these coupling rods up, and then we'll move on when that's been done. Okay, so I've made the 4 coupling rods now. They're quite short. I'm not going to bother cleaning them up because it isn't particularly necessary at the moment. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to fold the chassis into a U section, and I'm going to use my hold and fold, the long one, to do this. I'll keep the camera rolling while I do it to save a bit of time. Luckily there are cutouts, because these bits that you may see above my finger, these bits here, they need to be folded a different way. So I'm just going to fold it into a U shape, and then I'll show you what I'm going to do next. Okay, I now have my chassis folded. I've checked that the front and the middle stretchers that join are square, using a small set square that I have. And the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to install the middle 2 bearings in the slots that we prepared earlier, and just check that I've got these the bearing carriers the correct way round. So that's the right hand one. So we've installed the right hand slide in the slot, and we install the bearing from the outside, and although the hole in the frame is bigger than the bearing, the hole in the I don't know if you can see, but there is a slight bit of movement there, which is perfectly enough for what we require. So hopefully that will stay in place, and then what we'll do the left hand one as well. So install the slide from the bottom, put the bearing through from the outside, just check that moves up and down nicely. Yep, that moves up and down nicely. And then the next thing we're going to do, we're going to use some axle bearing jigs. So we'll install the, hopefully, if it will go through. Right, so yes, I've met a problem already. The 3/16 doesn't actually go through the bearings, so we will get out our 3/16 reamer if I can find it. There it is. So we've got a 3/16 reamer, and we will try to do the axles by hand, see if you can do it by hand. Yeah, there's only it's just a little bit of an edge on it, so we'll do that for that, and we'll also do it for the other one. So it's just a little bit of an edge on it. We'll just check that goes, yep, that goes through nicely, and then we'll have another go at installing the bearings with the axle former. So put that through, and that should go through nicely, which it does. Okay, so there's your axle former in the and we'll put the front one in as well, and that's got a bit of an edge, so we'll just run the bearings through with the 3/16. I have got 3 of these, but I've actually lost one of them. I can't find it at the moment, so we'll manage with 2. We should be able to manage okay with 2. So there we've got our 2, and the next thing to do is to take the coupling rod. Doesn't matter, doesn't need to be cleaned up, and fit it over the, and then the same on the other side. Hopefully the other one won't fall off. I normally use blue tack, but I haven't got any to hand at the moment. So there you have your front and rear, front and middle axle with the coupling rods. And what we'll do now is we will solder the middle bearing to the carrier inside, so that it's got some movement. Okay, I won't show doing that, and then I'll come back to it when I've done that. Okay, so I've now done the middle axles, and you may be able to see they do move slightly, which will be enough for my purposes. I've checked, and they're still in position using the standard axle bearing jigs and the coupling rods. The next thing you need to do is, with this kit, is you need to joggle the rear frames. Now there are 2 half-etch lines on either side, and the purpose of this is to give the rear pony wheel a little bit of side play. This is the frame spacer that goes in place in that, and you can see that it's shaped to fit the joggle in the rear frames. There are also, which you may just be able to see, 4 lugs which need bending up to to 90 degrees from the rear bit of the spacer, oh sorry, the front bit of the spacer, and the holes in them need to be drilled 0.5 millimeter. This is for some piano wire which actually acts as the suspension for the rear pony wheel and keeps the pair of wheels in contact with the track. So I will solder this in place, show you what I've done. The other thing that I've done on the chassis is, you may be able to see, is I've bent down the two ears on either side, and these support the front footsteps, and I'll also fit these as well. They're quite straightforward. They're all half etched, and I'll fit them, I'll bend them up using my hold and fold which you saw earlier, and I'll show you what it's like completed. Okay, so now we've added quite a lot of parts. We've fitted the rear spacer, the oddly shaped rear spacer at the back. We've bent up the tabs which I showed you earlier, which are the supports for the large injector. We've also fitted the front steps which fold up quite nicely, very nicely in fact, and they fit on the fold down ears that I showed you earlier. The steps, the upper step is a separate etching, and there's quite a large tab which you maybe see, which is, I've not quite fitted that correctly, but there we go. We'll bend it flat. So we'll bend it flat. We've added fillets of solder, all the joints, all the 90-degree joints which are going to be load bearing. So here, underneath here for that, again with all these tabs and everything. At the front we have fitted the front bogie pivot, which is a brass turning that fits into the plate. It's very important with that plate, if you can see through there, there is the top of the plate, but the larger rectangular hole locates the cylinders, so the plate needs to be in. There's a little cutout in the bottom edge, and the bogie support plate needs to be fully seated into that. And then behind we have the motion plate here, we have the front of the cylinders, the third cylinder here, and we have a pewter representation of the middle piston rod, because that is quite visible through the arc of the front bogie, the rear wheel. And all we have left to do now is fit the rear steps, which come as one quite large etch. So these are the rear steps and the rear guard irons, and these are the front steps and the front guard irons. I will do that quickly, and then this particular part will be finished. Okay, so just bear with me while I do this. Okay, so there we have it. We have fitted the front guard irons and the buffer beam supports, which are actually one piece, and we've fitted the rear steps and guard irons, which again are one piece. I'll just that's not quite true. All that is left to do now with this for step one, I will just check that I've put everything on it that I should have done, and it looks like I have put everything on it that I should have done. All that is left to do is to strengthen the steps, the rear steps and the front guard irons, with some lengths of wire. That's catered for in the kit, but I won't show me doing it. You just solder lengths of wire on the inside of the vulnerable parts to actually give them more support. So there we have it. That's page one of the A8 class kit. hasn't gone together too badly as far as I'm concerned, and I've found it relatively straightforward so far. So when I come to do it next, it will be page 2, which is a lot of the detailing, the brakes, the injectors, the sandboxes, etc, etc, and hopefully I'll be able to do that for you soon. Thank you for watching, and please watch out for more instalments of building the DJH A8. Thank you very much.